According to the National Center for Drug Abuse, over 165 million Americans ages 12 and up are currently abusing drugs or alcohol. Of those 165 million Americans, there is a mom, dad, sister, brother, wife, husband, son, daughter, or grandparent praying and pleading that they would stop. Addiction is a subject most people don't like to talk about and is kept behind closed doors. But the Finding Hope podcast will bring light to the subject and give families that are living in shame, guilt, hopelessness, fear, worry, and anger tools and education to find strength, peace, happiness, joy, and hope. Hello, I'm Amy LaRue, Finding Hope Coordinator for Hope is Alive Ministries and your host for this Finding Hope podcast. At Hope is Alive, our mission is to radically change the lives of drug addicts, alcoholics, and those who love them. We do this through our intentional next-level sober living homes and faith-based support groups for the loved ones of addicts called Finding Hope. Thank you guys for joining us today. Today, I'm very excited about a special guest joining us, Mr. Mark Woodward. And so on this episode, Mark, we're going to be discussing the different drug trends and hear your expertise in this field. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm Mark Woodward. I work for the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics, and I've been with the Bureau of Narcotics for 30 years. And my expertise is primarily dealing with everything from drug education. We do a lot of outreach events to legislation. I've, in my 30 years, probably helped pass about 200 different drug and human trafficking and money laundering bills at our state capitol, working with our legislative partners on drug policy because, unfortunately, like as the drug trends change, the laws need to change. Otherwise, we've got loopholes that the criminals can exploit. So we're constantly up there running new bills to deal with new issues that are popping up, and that's one of my primary responsibilities. But yeah, I enjoy working with different groups, getting, especially my favorite part of my job is going into the schools, talking to kids. I love getting to do that. In October, it's Red Ribbon Week, so I'm going
to kick all that off.
I'm going to be in a number of schools. I figured up I'm going to be putting about probably 1,400 miles on my car in 4 days, hitting as many schools as we can, because we know for many of these kids, it's the only anti-drug message they're ever going to get.
Absolutely.
And so if a school can give us 30 minutes in a gym, we're going to take that opportunity. Many of them can't do like an 8-week DARE program or several months, but if they can give us 20, 30 minutes in a gym, we're going to take that opportunity. So that's one of my favorite parts. But yeah, that's what we do at the Bureau of Narcotics is drug enforcement, human trafficking, and a lot of drug and human trafficking education.
But really, I met you probably about 10 years ago at Finding Hope.
Yes.
And you weren't there as a speaker.
Yeah.
You're there as a loved one of someone that struggles with substances.
Right, absolutely. And I tell people, regardless of what the walk of life is, whether you're a police officer, a pastor of a church, we're all impacted by addiction. And if you don't think you are, then you just haven't seen it yet. But it's there. It's very close. And it's no respecter of person. And so, yeah, I've got addiction in my own family. And I had a brother that had struggled with alcohol for over 20 years. And it had become a problem, just like a lot of addiction. It's not just his problem. It's our entire family's problem. It's everybody around him. And so we were thrilled to find out that our church that I attend, Putnam City Baptist Church, was starting a Finding Hope class. And so I was one of the first ones that very first night out there to meet Lance and to hear his vision for helping families of addicts, because there wasn't a lot of Christian support for family members. And they needed a place to turn. And so I really went for two reasons. One, because maybe I could share some expertise when it comes to drug issues that some of the members in our Finding Hope were dealing with. And maybe they didn't know much beyond just the name of the drug that their son or daughter or spouse is using. And then also just to learn tips for myself that I could use to help with my situation and my family, but then also take the information that I've learned in Finding Hope and be able to share it with others. Because, again, we're out kicking in doors. We're serving search warrants. yes, we're taking dangerous people to jail, but oftentimes there's families behind who are calling us and saying, or they're out at the house when we're serving the warrants, and they say, I don't know what to do. I never saw this coming. I just don't know where to turn. And I've been able to share some information that I've learned through Lance and the Finding Hope to help hopefully get these people to understand they're not alone. There's a lot of people going through this, and there is a place that people, you can lean on, and that's what Finding Hope was all about. And so I've been excited to work with Finding Hope for a number of years, and also just learning from it and being able to share that with others.
Well, and I love what you said, like, this disease doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what the family does, whether they're a pastor, an officer, it does not matter.
Right.
That, and it's so true. And I've told my friend that once. She goes, "There's no one in my family that's impacted by addiction." And I said, "Yes, there is.
There is."
6 weeks later,
Right.
I got a phone call. "Amy, you're right."
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry that I am right, but
It is.
You know.
If you could put on glasses that allowed you to identify who the drug addicts and people struggling with alcohol are in your community, you'd be scared to death. They are police officers. They're doctors, lawyers, soldiers, pastors of your church. People, many of them who've never used an illegal drug in their life, but maybe they fell down a flight of stairs or blew out their knee playing pickup basketball, and they left the hospital with some painkillers that suddenly just became more than they could deal with. And so it can start out very subtle. And oftentimes, with painkiller addiction, first of all, you're talking about something we oftentimes give them a pass because they're going to say, "I'm still in pain," and you're going to remember the car accident, and they're going to argue with you. And so we oftentimes allow them to go a lot further down a path than we would somebody if you found out that they were using cocaine or fentanyl or heroin or any of those types of street drugs. And so it's difficult, but they do come from all walks of life. And if you don't think it's in your family, you just haven't found the signs yet. The signs are there too. And that's what I tell people when I do my presentations. And I have an entire presentation that's just on understanding that your addicts are leaving a trail to their addiction. And oftentimes, just as a defense mechanism, we don't want to follow those.
Yeah.
And so we want to dismiss some of the things that we heard or saw. But oftentimes, and you know this, tragically, after a loved one has passed away or gotten arrested, they saw why. Oftentimes the first reaction is, "Wow, I never saw this coming. I was really blindsided." And then they start replaying things over in their mind, whether it's in the past few days, few months, or even years. They start to go, "The signs were always there. I just didn't want to follow them." And again, it's a defense mechanism. We don't want to go down those trails because we're scared of what we're going to find as a loved one. So we want to dismiss something that maybe we saw, we heard, something's missing. We don't explore that.
And we don't want to open up
the
can of worms.
We're scared.
Right?
We're scared.
How are they going to respond to me? What are they going to react like? What, I don't know what to do with this.
Right. And how am I going to handle it? And so I don't have to handle it if I don't deal with it. So it's that out of sight, out of mind. But addicts are leaving so many trails.
Can you talk more about that? Like, what are some of those trails that you see?
Well, it could be everything from missing work. It can be everything from not taking care of themselves, their hygiene. You're talking about credit cards that are going, things around the house missing. Again, absence of work. Sometimes it's just their body language. I always explain it as kind of like playing poker. I can tell by somebody's reaction whether I'm going to win or lose this hand, and I don't even need to know what they're holding or what they don't need to know what I'm holding. I can tell by their body reaction at certain times, and it's no different with your addict. It's like you're playing poker with your addict. You know what's normal body language. You know what's normal inflection. You know what's the normal pace of their voice when you ask a common question. And for example, when I'm talking to parents, when they're confronting their child about something, and again, that child could be a 13-year-old or a 56-year-old, but when they're confronting their child, just ask them a simple question in a loving way and then watch their reaction. They don't even have to open their mouth before you can already kind of tell.
Their body language,
you can
their
tell
face.
Whether they're tensing up. Did they take a slight step back? You know what's normal behavior out of your spouse because you've been playing, like it's like a poker players, some of them play at the same casino for years, and so they know the tells of the people they're playing against. You've been living with this spouse, these children, your loved one, a coworker. You've been working around them, and so you know what's normal and what's not. And so start looking at that body language, the inflection in their voice. How do they start getting defensive? Things along those lines. There's so many things that are kind of like the addict's defensive playbook 101 that a lot of parents don't either they don't recognize it or they don't want to we don't want to explore that with a second
question. So what
question.
should they do if they start seeing these signs? What do you tell parents?
I always tell them, don't ignore them because...
Got to rip off the Band-Aid.
Right, but do it in a loving way, because if you get confrontational with an addict, it's just like any other criminal. I mean, like on a traffic stop, we tell our officers, you can control the emotions oftentimes by how they're going to respond to how you respond. So if you're already very confrontational, they're going to go defensive. They're going to probably do that again eventually anyway. They're going to blame everybody else for their problem. They're going to get mad at you, but you can mitigate it by continuing to ask, but keep asking those questions. Because when you're asking those questions, they may be arguing with you on the outside verbally. Inside, they're getting convicted because they know they just got busted. And this is a problem for an addict, because an addict has to stay in a comfortable place, just like the loved one does. And you get them out of that comfortable place, a couple of things are going to happen. They're either going to run further or they're going to run and get help. And oftentimes, and that's emotional, that's physical, but you can't just dismiss it, because so many loved ones are going to say, I wish I had intervened earlier, but I didn't, and now I don't have a chance to save them. And but even if they make the choice to get mad and run away after you've confronted them, you can't control that.
Absolutely.
So don't blame yourself if they do run away.
Just last week at my Finding Hope meeting, we have sometimes the Hope is Life residents come and share. Recently on a podcast, we had a resident or alumni share. And what she said was, it was almost a sense of relief when I went to treatment, and it was like my family finally said something. It's like they're walking on those eggshells trying to avoid that conversation. And she's like, I just wanted to have that conversation, whether it would have been pretty or ugly. It would have given me a load taken off. Like, I don't have to try to hide this anymore. And it's at the front. Like, whether she would have sought help at that time, we don't know. But what she was saying, and it just spoke to me, is like, yeah, I wanted my family to say something.
Right. They are. And that's oftentimes when I talk to a lot of people who are in recovery, including a lot of the men and women who've come to our Finding Hope and shared their story. One of the common questions is, what was it that kept you in your addiction so long? And one of the number one answers is, I never had to change my behavior. And it's the same with any addict. And they're not going to change until they have to change, and they've got to want to change. But if you don't make it uncomfortable for them, and I had to do this with my own family, with my brother and his alcohol. He had lost his marriage, had been kicked out of that situation. My parents took him in. I had to have some tough conversations with my parents because they made it so comfortable. My brother never had to get help. Now, my brother got help today, and he's sober today.
That's wonderful.
But it was because we had to have some tough conversations, and I literally had to take him out of my parents' house one night, and I gave him a choice. He was either going to go to help, or I was going to drive him to get help, or I was going to drive him to I-40 and Agnew across the street from the help and say, you're sleeping under the bridge because you're not sleeping here anymore. We're not going to make you comfortable. My parents, of course, they're like, well, he could die out on the street. I'm like, he's dying anyway. You're just allowing him to stay in this behavior so that he's going to die quicker. He's got to get to a point where he's got to want to change. And it's having those tough conversations with him. And the longer you delay doing that, the deeper they are into their addiction, and the harder it's going to be for them. And you may not get that second or third chance. But when you do encounter some of these, just watch their reaction, and then in a loving way, start talking to them. Whether it's things missing from the house, you start noticing changes in their hygiene. They don't care about anything but themselves. And when you start approaching them about some of this, and their reaction is going to be negative, because first of all, they're going to deny that they got a problem. You're the one with the problem, and this is all your fault. That's just right out of the addict playbook, and we've all dealt with that. But eventually, they're getting convicted inside, and they're going to have to make some choices. But they now know that and that you're not going to allow this to continue until they get some help. And of course, as we've talked about in a lot of the meetings, you've got to come up with boundaries now at this point. That this is not going to continue in our house. If you're going to continue to do this, which I don't approve of, you're not going to do it in this house, and that's your choice. And you got to have to start having some of those tough conversations with them.
Absolutely. Well, I also want to talk about on here, that's great information. I'm so glad you brought that up about having those tough conversations. We are avoidance so much.
We are.
But let's talk about the drug trends.
Yes.
And I love I've heard you talk, I don't know, probably 10 plus times. And every time I pick up on something, And I think I want us to start right with the marijuana.
Right.
Will you start sharing, because that's a topic,
Sure.
You hear it.
Well, and it's one of the things that in my 30 years of doing drug enforcement, I've told people that I've seen more lives wrecked by marijuana than any other drug. Not that they smoke it and die, because that's not going to happen. But right there, they think, well, then this stuff is harmless. And it feels good. I wish using drugs felt like chewing on broken glass. If it did, people wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But marijuana and other drugs, but marijuana is going to tell your 13-year-old, I love this behavior, because it does take away their problem, whether it's stress at school, stress at home with the family, whatever it may be. And so now you've got a 13-year-old who says, I love this behavior because I feel good. And once the brain figures out a behavior it likes, that drug now owns them, because the brain is going to crave that feeling. And if you don't give them what they want, it's going to fight back. And the brain does not fight fair. The brain is evil when it's fighting for what it wants. And so you're now going to have to keep feeding it. So many people with marijuana today, in just in Oklahoma, as of this morning, I believe there's 354,000 people that have a patient card. And the number one reason that they ask the doctor to put on their recommendation letter is anxiety and depression. Well, what they don't understand is, yes, you have anxiety and depression because you're using marijuana. And when you stop feeding the brain what it wants, it's going to fight back through things early on like anxiety and depression. So they've got to continue to maintain a high. I go to so many middle schools and high schools now, and one of the first questions I ask the staff is, how long have you had the vape detectors in the bathrooms? And they're like, how did you know? I said, every school has them.
Yep.
These kids cannot go 8 hours without using. And we're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old middle school kids who are already so hooked on the THC vaping that they can't make it, because by second hour, they're already getting that depression and anxiety.
I have a high schooler and a middle schooler, and they tell me all the time, they know which bathrooms to avoid because that's the ones that without the vape,
It's because they're hooked at a very early age. And the thing with marijuana is, though, we as a culture have put it in this comfortable box. We've got these drugs make us feel good. I feel better. It's going to heal all my problems and bring in all this money for our schools. These drugs are kind of dangerous. You got to be careful with those. And then these drugs in this box are pure evil. And I tell people, you can't do that, because I've seen marijuana wreck more lives than any other drug, because of the path it puts them on. And when I deal with people in addiction and the people we arrest and in recovery and juvenile detention, I always like to ask them one question: how did you get started on this path? Okay. And I've heard the same answer for 30 years. I just want to hear them tell me. Smoking weed with my friends I was a teenager. They don't wake up at 29 and say, you know what, I'm going to go buy fentanyl and shove it in my neck just to see what it does. You worked yourself up to that point in your active addiction. A guy is at 42 is not going to go to the pharmacy and say, you know what, I'm going to buy some Sudafed and cook meth just to see what it's like. No, he's worked himself up to cooking meth in his basement to feed his addiction. And it starts out very benign, because they try marijuana, they love it. And we're talking about marijuana 20 years ago was doing this. The stuff today is, it's so much stronger. And what they're going to be using 6 months from now is going to be stronger than what that kid's using after school today, because it will never be enough. Yeah. And that's another thing. Parents are giving these kids a pass because they go, well, we all just used marijuana in high school. What's the big deal? I'm like, no, we didn't. Second of all, they're not using the same thing you used 20 years ago in high school. And thirdly, they're not using the same thing they were using back in June. They can't, because your brain's going to keep adjusting. And so they're going to have more tomorrow than they had today to get to the same point. It's like an alcoholic who starts out as a 13-year-old drinking beer. By 18, they're drinking 2 cases. And by 23, they're having 4 bottles of vodka a day. And they're not doing it to get drunk. They're doing it to keep from being sick. Your kids are not vaping in the bathrooms at the high school to feel good. They're doing it to keep from that anxiety and depression, because they're not maintaining.
So they can get through that next hour.
Yeah, the brain is craving it, because you have introduced something that the brain says, wow, I love this behavior. And now that drug owns you, because the brain is not going to let you go until you give it what it wants. And so then by 16, 17, they're still using marijuana, but it's now their come down. They've moved on to pills. Because the marijuana is pretty much boring. It's just to ease the come down. They're now into pain pills. They're on to fentanyl and some of the other things that we're dealing with. So that's the troubling thing about marijuana in our culture, is mainly our attitude, that it's still this harmless drug that's going to cure all these diseases and bring in this money for our schools. I don't get into the marijuana medicine side. If they want to talk about that, I can talk about that for about 2 weeks. But just like painkillers are great. If you get in a car crash, they're wonderful. But you can't talk about the benefits of painkillers without talking about them potentially being the most deadliest drugs on the planet. But our culture only wants to talk about the positives of marijuana. Yep. Marijuana is harmless. And again, it's part of that because it makes me feel comfortable. When you got 354,000 people with a patient card, and many of them are people who are in their 50s, they're making six figures a year. They're prominent people. You'd be surprised at how many people the drug marijuana owns them. But more troubling for me, from a public safety standpoint, is what it's doing to our culture. Because first of all, we're 50th in education, but we are number 3 in the country.
Oklahoma.
Right.
Yes.
But we're 3rd in the country in teen marijuana use.
Wow.
We're number 3 in the country. We are ahead of California. We're ahead of Colorado, Washington, New Mexico, and Oregon. We have a higher teen marijuana use than all those states. We are number 3 in the country.
I did not know that.
And we weren't until 2018, and that's when the voters legalized it. And so now you've got an easier access. These kids don't have to sneak around. They just say, I don't feel good, and our culture says, well, then try marijuana because it's the harmless drug that's going to cure all your problems. But, the car accidents, the poisons from our Poison Control Center for the edibles, especially 0 to 5-year-old kids, because again, you got 354,000 people. That's a lot of homes that have marijuana and edibles in it. But even our 9 to 29-year-olds, that range of hospitalizations, not just negative events with marijuana. We're talking about hospitalizations because of marijuana. That's what we're dealing with today, a so much more powerful drug that's causing everything from schizophrenia to bipolar to severe depression, heart arrhythmias, respiratory issues. And those are the surface ones. We could talk about the marijuana psychosis, which is incredibly scary. That we're seeing
you've shared
more
stories
and more
about that before.
It is such a scary issue that we don't want to talk about because it's marijuana, and it doesn't always happen. But what marijuana psychosis is it can just cause for unknown reasons. Somebody become very psychotic, unpredictable, like somebody high on PCP, where they suddenly just become violent. They're hallucinating. There's several well-documented cases, and I've spoken to some neuropsychologists who've testified at trials about just the growing issues of marijuana psychosis in developing brains and high-grade marijuana, frequent use. That is the combination for the marijuana psychotic breaks that can be just as violent.
And you usually think it's some other drug.
Yeah, you
right?
think that most of the time when police officers or a parent arrives on the scene of one of these kids, and again, the kid could be 17 or 57, you're going to think initially they're high on meth or PCP. They're not responding to the officers. They have no response to non-lethal force. They have pain paralysis, so they don't feel pain. They have superhuman adrenaline going and strength to fight officers, snap leather restraints. You're going to think that if it was marijuana, it must have been laced with PCP. And when they do the tox screen, the only thing on board is marijuana. That's the marijuana we're dealing with today. And plus that in a developing brain is just a recipe for disaster. Plus the brain is going to love how this makes them feel. So it's not like you just say, stop. Our culture says, no, you're medicating. You have nothing to feel ashamed of. You just keep using and don't listen to those people. They're just puppets for the government and all this. I've been called every name in the book.
I'm sure you have.
If people aren't mad at us, then I need to re-examine what we're doing, because
that's true. Yep.
People get mad when you question them about their choices, even if it's a horrific choice that's going to impact other people. So marijuana, it's just troubling, just how dangerous it is. But I think even worse is what our attitude is. Kids are paying attention to what adults are doing. They see them voting for this stuff. They hear the message about it being medicine. And again, whether it's medicine or not, it's got a dark side. And it's certainly not something we want our 12 and 13-year-olds getting hooked on, but they are at a very early age.
I mean, I have straight up, you talk about don't skirt around conversations with my 16-year-old and my 13-year-old. Like, they've known since...
Often and early.
We have these tough conversations. Even, this weekend, my daughter's going to a dance, and, it's a high school dance, and then they're, go hang out and play games at a friend's house, which I trust the whole family, but I still have that conversation.
You do.
Every single time.
I hate
Mom,
to say this.
I get it. Well, good. I'm glad you get it, but I'm going to tell you again.
Right. Because, parents don't want to hear this, but sometimes you got to be a parent, okay? You got to be nosy. You got to get in their business. Find out because again, much like that trail of breadcrumbs for your addict, It's the same with your teenager. Your teenagers are telling you what they're into. What games do they play? What videos are they watching? What websites are they going to? What friends do they hang out with? If all of those have some sort of a drug nexus, you know what your kid's into. If they're visiting websites that already talk about marijuana, if they're hanging around kids at school who've already been in trouble for marijuana, guess what your kid's into? He's going to or she is going to gravitate to things that are of common interest to them. And so your kids are telling a lot about them, even if they never open their mouth, because teenagers don't typically have a heart-to-heart with their parents. But you find out what music they like, the videos they like, the sites they watch, the games they play, and the kids they hang out with. They're telling you everything you need to know about what my kid is interested in. And again, you're going to lead a trail to their problems if you get to know it. But a lot of parents don't want to interfere.
Well, something you always said, their phone is not their phone.
No.
I pay for the phone. My kids' phones now
it's your phone
in the living room at
it's
bedtime.
It's your bedroom. You may allow them to sleep in there, but that's your bedroom, and you can go in anytime you want to and search that room. Yep. And I've got parents who say, "Oh, I don't go in my kid's room; that invades their privacy." And I'm like, "Then that's why your kid's got problems." So and you do it in a loving way. You don't want to just be overly aggressive and that way. Do it in a loving way that you're concerned about, especially if you've already seen something. Maybe you found marijuana in their jacket pocket. Okay, they've already crossed that line. They brought on your behavior of going into their room and saying, when they're screaming at you, going, "You're invading my privacy, and you don't need to be messing with my phone." Hey, if they paid for the phone and then knock yourselves out, and they're living on their own because they're going to live with the choices of it. But you've got a responsibility as a parent. You don't want drug use in your house. You don't want the friends of the drug users in your house, because everything you have is going to disappear. They're going to steal you blind. I mean, they will. Plus, you're going to be on the hook for any bad behavior that happens. Your kid gets out on the road, crosses the center line, and kills somebody. And again, it's more than just I don't want to make my child mad. You've got to be a parent.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked a little bit about marijuana. What else are you seeing these days? I mean, you mentioned the fentanyl, so that's been over the last few years. So what are you seeing with that right now?
The fentanyl is very frightening because it is so mainstream today. And 15 years ago to even 10 years ago, fentanyl was primarily used by criminals as a cutting agent so they could expand how much heroin. They would get 10 pounds of heroin, backfill it with 9 pounds of fentanyl, which is cheap and powerful. And now they can take that, and now they're selling 90 pounds out on the streets. But it's the cheaper, but nobody knows because it's so powerful. Now we're seeing the criminals cutting it to look like, it's already been what we call blue M30s, the counterfeits of oxycodone. But now they're stamping it to look like what a lot of teenagers are familiar with in the schools and at clubs as ecstasy or Molly, things that's got Calvin Klein, Mitsubishi, some of the other common stamps on it. We're finding it in pills that look like Tylenol. If it's in a pill form, they can counterfeit it, and so you might never think anything about a kid's ADHD medicine as Xanax, a Tylenol, or something that looks like it's candy, but it's going to have fentanyl in it. The message we have when we go to schools, I don't care what drug you're taking from your friends, expect it to have fentanyl. Even the guy who's selling marijuana, he's probably selling fentanyl pills or has contact with it. We have had people who've overdosed on fentanyl and they didn't realize it was in the marijuana because the same guy cross-contaminated it because it's all sold in the same bag out of his car. And somebody with a low tolerance to fentanyl, it doesn't take very much. You're talking about minute particles you'd barely see on your skin. Yeah. Somebody with a low tolerance of powerful fentanyl can overdose. But it is everywhere now, and these kids are, we're seeing 17-year-old kids overdosing and dying from a quarter of a pill that they got from their boyfriend, and we investigate a lot of the overdoses, and you realize this kid didn't mean to kill his girlfriend. He thought it was either oxy or, maybe he's taken fentanyl before and he didn't have a problem. That doesn't mean you won't the next time. And what's really frightening, too, is we've had this safety net for about 12 years called Narcan or naloxone. We are getting into Narcan-resistant variations. We're seeing them adding things like xylazine, which is an animal tranquilizer, because the withdrawals from opioids are so powerful. And if you can add a sedative to it, like xylazine, atizolam, bromozolam, something, suddenly the addicts want that. And even when you tell them, but if you take this, Narcan may not work, they're like, I don't care. You don't realize they're not using the drug to feed their addiction. They're using it to get out of the pain and misery they're in. In fact, they'll tell you, I don't care about dying. I've died 3 times this week, and their friends brought them back. I can't stand being the dope sick, the pain, the vomiting, the diarrhea, the fever, the cramps. And so when you put something like a Tezolam or a xylazine in it, it will absolutely sedate them. And you see these horrific pictures of street corner addicts who look like they're locked up. Some of them are bent over backwards and frozen in time, which is just hard to believe. But that is typically the xylazine that's going to do that. It's a horse tranquilizer. So if it can sedate a 2,000-pound horse, what's it going to do to a 90-year-old drug addict, a 90-pound drug addict out on the streets when she's shooting it in her neck? So the xylazine is not going to react to Narcan. And it's about 24-to-1 ratio of xylazine to Narcan, or to the fentanyl. So there's very little fentanyl in it. It also causes ulcers and abscesses. So you're seeing 20-year-old kids losing arms and legs from these infections that they're getting from the xylazine. They're also adding medetomidine. Medetomidine is a drug that's also a synthetic drug that's being added to it that can be 40 times stronger than xylazine. And medetomidine is relatively new, but it is, again, a cheap, powerful drug made in China. The Chinese cartels move it to the Mexican cartels, who move it into the U.S. in their fentanyl and their counterfeit pills. And most people don't know that medetomidine is even in the fentanyl that they're buying out on the streets in these pills. And then the other area that we're seeing problems is the nitazines. And nitazines, there's a number of different. We've identified 12 different nitazines here in Oklahoma. What it is a synthetic opioid that's like fentanyl on steroids. The criminals, it's cheap, and that's why they're adding it, because, again, it maximizes their profits. When they can take heroin, take it out, move fentanyl in it. Now we're pulling fentanyl out and moving nitazines in it. Each time it's cheaper and cheaper. You're talking about 7/100ths of a penny to make one pill that's sold for $2 on the streets. When you're moving 30,000 pills a week into Oklahoma City, you can see the billions of dollars in profit. And so nitazines, if you were using Narcan to bring somebody back, it'll work, but you better have a bunch, because nitazines are an opiate, but it's so much stronger that, and I've got a son who's an EMT who rides all through Oklahoma City, and he's saying that what used to work 1 or 2 hits, you might need 7 or 8. And a lot of parents, a lot of people who are just normal, schools, for example, that might have a small supply of Narcan in an emergency.
Well, I keep one in my little purse, right? I don't keep 10.
I do too. I've got 2 or 3 in the trunk of my car. I've got some in my office I carry with me. But if you made it, maybe 2 or 3 would have saved somebody 2 years ago if they're under the influence of one of these nitazine type fentanyl counterfeits. It may not work, because you can hit them 6-7 times. And so it's frightening that we are getting into naloxone resistant drugs, and it's by preference. That's what the users want, because they're trying to get out of the sickness, and even they will get a tolerance to fentanyl. It seems so crazy, as strong as fentanyl can be, that even they will need something stronger over time, because the brain will keep adjusting.
Well, and that's where, we see in here overdoses too, because they get in their recovery.
Right.
And then they might have a relapse.
Yeah,
and
so
then they take what they were using prior, and that's what it's like. They're doing so well, and then took poison. 1 or 2 pills, and
that's all it takes. Yeah, and it's it's very troubling, because parents don't know what, and we don't even know what the next big drug is that's going to be out there. We're not even experts at this, because we're not going to know what the newest drug is on the streets of Oklahoma City till we get an autopsy report. That's how we're going to find out about the newest drug. And that means you've got a kid on a table somewhere. And that's how we've identified 12 different nitazines just in the last 2.5 years. It's from autopsy reports. They draw the blood, they do the tox screen during autopsy, and they find out that they've taken this drug that we've outlawed, and they've twisted the molecule. Now it's a new version of the nitazine that's technically illegal, and that's how they keep doing it. Every time we outlaw one, they change it up and put a new drug out on the streets.
So what can we do?
Well, education is one of the biggest things. Okay. That's critical, because we need to have drug enforcement. We've got to stop those who don't care who they hurt, as long as they're making a profit. We've got to have treatment. We've got to have options available for people who say, okay, I've had enough. I'm ready to get help. Yeah. When they've hit that rock bottom. And as we've talked about in Finding Hope, when they've hit the basement of rock bottom and they finally say, I need to go, they need to have a bed. And a lot of families just don't have that available. So we've got to make treatment. We've got to help those who want to get help. And then education. We need to keep them from ever getting on this path. And that goes back to drug education. That's why we love Red Ribbon Week. We get into the schools, maybe talk to these kids. If we can get one kid in a gymnasium of 600 to say, you know what, I'm not going to do drugs because I don't want to end up like that, then that's a victory for us. But it's got to start way before we get into the schools, and that's where parents, at a very early age. It's never too young. I always joke, but it's true. Well, I'd be reading my kids a Bible story when they're 1 year old in a rocking chair, and I'd be like, "There's Noah. There were no drugs on the boat." I'm planting those little seeds.
There's no drugs on the boat. I like that, Mark.
Talk to those kids early on and keep hitting them. You got to keep hitting them because these kids are gonna hear the message from the media and social media and their friends that drugs are cool, and it's really scary when you see a famous person overdose on a drug and suddenly that drug becomes more popular because he or she was an influencer, and if they use that, then I want to use it. And we do see drugs getting more popular with teenagers after overdoses, but you got to get them on that path, and then keep them involved in stuff that where you can get extra set of eyes, get to know who your kids hang out with, and then get to know the parents of those kids. Keep them involved as much as you can. You can't drag them to church. You can't drag them to football practice. But if they're in some positive type events that will keep them occupied, because so many kids who are, 9 to 19 say they use drugs because they're bored. It's something to do. It's entertainment to them. And so if you give them another reason to stay away from drugs and other alternatives, like, getting them involved in youth and sports and other things like that, that can at least help.
Yeah. And we at Hope is Live, we've recently started our school support program as well. Yes. And it's like, not just the one time, like we are investing in these students, investing in these teachers, awesome. And going to assemblies and doing it throughout the whole school year, because we've got to keep getting in front of them, sharing the stories. But look, sharing from our residents that was in the seats where they are. And now look at them, they've gotten to a path of recovery and almost teaching them don't do what I did,
That's where you're going to have an impact, because I've been doing this 30 years. We are arresting second, third generations now because, if you get a kid who's using drugs, he is so much more likely to be a drug user as an adult who's now having kids, and now their kids see that as what's normal or expected.
And that's true. I love that you said
that
they
cycle.
Think it's what's normal.
It is. And someone just thought, I didn't have a choice. This was they have a choice. I've known plenty of people who grew up in drug houses. They never tried it, and they have amazing careers. But a lot of them don't see another way out. So they just think they're destined. And we have arrested second and third generations. But if we can get that kid to stay away from drugs, he or she is so much more likely to not use, because most of the time they don't just at 24 or 34 say out of nowhere, I'm going to go do drugs, see what it's like. They've worked themselves up to it. So if we can get that kid to stay away from drugs, they're so much more likely to be an adult. And then when they're having kids, they're instilling those values in them, and we are breaking that cycle. So it begins at a very early age.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you think our listeners should know what's going on, or anything else? I mean, just...
Well, I mean, we're working some other challenges at the Bureau of Narcotics. There's people who are always looking to profit regardless of who they hurt. We've got a number of kids that are in the high schools and middle schools that are buying products at gas stations that are being sold. They're every bit as dangerous as anything you buy on the street. Some of it is called THC hemp. And the companies are getting around it because they say, well, it's just hemp. It's low-level, non-intoxicating hemp that is legal in the U.S. for farmers and interstate commerce. The problem is once that THCA hemp is heated up, it becomes marijuana, and it becomes a very powerful form of marijuana. So a lot of these kids don't have to even go buy marijuana at a dispensary or sneak around. They can literally go to a convenience store and buy this THC hemp stuff perfectly legal. So we're trying to work with our prosecutors and legislators in Congress to outlaw some of these loopholes that these companies are using to say, no, sitting on a shelf cold, it's still hemp. And so, yeah, it is, but the kid's going to take it. He's going to heat it up like marijuana, and then it's not the same product. And they're like, well, hey, what the kids do with it after they leave the store is not our problem. So we're dealing with some of this gas station marijuana that's just as dangerous. And then there's a drug called kratom. Kratom is naturally produced in Southeast Asia. In high enough levels, people have said it makes them feel like they just took a fistful of painkillers. But you can also take one of the isolates of kratom called 7-OH or 7-hydroxy, and the 7-hydroxy synthesized is like painkillers like 34 times stronger. And that is what we're seeing sold in these gas stations as 7-OH, but it's still being sold as an all-natural supplement of kratom. And so they kind of make it sound like this warm, fuzzy dietary supplement. You take care. No, the people who are manufacturing, the people who buy it know exactly what they're doing. They're buying a product that is incredibly dangerous, incredibly addictive. And it's just like they bought a fistful of painkillers. But it's sold in the gas station legally because it's fallen under this Kratom all natural and not FDA regulated loophole. So again, be careful what you see, these kids buying at gas stations. If you see receipts, store receipts, you find them in your kid's room, that's from a local gas station. It's probably not going to say Kratom 7-OH hydroxy or anything like that on it. It may just have a number. Ask your kid, what did you buy? And then watch their reaction.
Yeah. It's all about the reaction,
right? It's all about the reaction.
Very good. Is there anything else, just encouragement or advice that you would give somebody?
I hate leaving people with all this.
No.
It's just dark and gloomy, and I don't want to.
So informative, though.
Because, we have hope, and that's the bottom line, is we know how this ends. We know that God ultimately is the victor over all this, and that's what keeps us going. But also know just right here and now, God's got a support system out there for us, and you don't have to struggle through this. And that's what's so troubling, is so many parents who don't want to say anything because they have to have this perfect facade, and everybody think my life is all together. Well, come on, nobody's life is together. Okay, I'll let you in on that secret right there. And it's okay to talk about your problems, because I guarantee there's people out there that can help you. And we will see some victories over this. And that's what keeps us going. It's what keeps me going, because we arrest a lot of people. And then we turn over the charges to the district attorney, and then we walk away. We go on to the next case. We don't always know. But when I'm sitting in a parking lot filling up my gas station, true story, filling up my car at a gas station, and I got this big burly biker-looking dude coming up behind me, and I could kind of see him in my peripheral vision. And he said, "Are you Mark Woodward with the Bureau of Narcotics?" I'm going, uh-oh. This could go a couple of different ways. I said, "Yes, I am." I turned around, and he held out his hand, and he said, "I want to shake your hand. I want to thank you." He said, "You guys arrested me 8 years ago on a meth charge." And he said, "Getting arrested put me in a program. I saved my life. I'm alive today because you guys arrested me."
Wow.
That's what keeps us going. There is hope out there. Some of these people, what we arrest, even if it's your son or daughter or your spouse, they get arrested, don't see that as the end. This could be the opportunity God is using to get them on a path to save their life. And, Hope is Alive and Finding Hope have all kinds of positive stories about people. And I remember some of the men that came and spoke to some of our Finding Hope groups. One guy said, and I'll never forget it, he said he'd been to treatment so many times, and he always left and would fall back. And they asked him, "Well, how are you sober today?" He said, "Because God put a cop in my life." He said, "I was arrested by a police department. I won't name, but he said, getting arrested, now I knew that if I walked out the back door of the treatment center this time, I was looking at a felony." And he said that's what kept me from walking out for the 20th time that he'd been to rehab and his parents had gone broke. God put a cop in his life. And that saved his life getting arrested. So don't see it as the end. It absolutely, and of course we've had people who've come to our Finding Hope and said, the only time I get sleep now is when I know my son or daughter's been arrested. And for parents hearing this for the first time, they're going, "Oh my gosh, my kid's in jail. I got to go rescue him." No. You will sleep at night knowing at least tonight my son or daughter is not buying drugs in a hotel, and I'm going to get the call that they found him dead. And so there is hope out there, and people's lives are being changed, even if it can get bumpy getting there. And so that's what keeps my focus going.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing
your
for
expertise.
And I could just sit here all day and listen to you.
Well, and again, thank you all for what y'all are doing.
Yeah. And so I like to end my podcast with a challenge. And so just kind of listening to you today, I think one of my first challenges, don't ignore the signs. Right? Just confront it head on.
Yep.
And maybe you're scared to do it. Well, call one of us. Let's talk through it, and then let's get you to confront that. But also, you didn't really say it, but you did say it. Get plugged into that community. Like if you're listening, and I actually had a phone call a couple weeks ago, and she's like, no one knows what's going on. And she does our Zoom meetings, which is great. And I was like, find that one person to share, but like find that community, because like you said, we all have stuff going on. No one's perfect, whether Facebook and Instagram or whatever social media is out there says. We all have a story going on behind. So get plugged into a community, to Finding Hope, so that you can start to connect and realize you're not alone in this, and you don't have to go through this alone. And so thank you again, Mark, for being here. And thank you guys for joining us this week. And you can learn more about Finding Hope at FindingHope.Today. But before you go, we would love for you to give us a 5-star review and share this on social media, and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss our next hope-filled episode. Thanks again for joining me, Amy LaRue and Mr. Mark Woodward, on this episode of Finding Hope. And remember, you are not alone. It's not your fault. There is hope.